You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. This episode is presented in its original recorded format. Listener discretion is advised due to language. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Fred Roehl tonight. Fred, this is going to be a fun interview. I've never had an individual be requested so many times for me to get them on the podcast. Literally probably 3 to 4 times a day in the comments, I get someone saying, you need to have Fred from Alaska. You need to have Fred from Subarctic Alaska Sasquatch channel come on and talk about Alaska hairy man. So I'm just so happy to finally get you on, Fred. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, fantastic. And just to give, there may be some listeners that, don't know about you yet, but if you're not following and subscribe to Subarctic Alaska Sasquatch channel on YouTube, you really need to make sure that you do right after this. It's pretty cool because you're recording Alaskan hairy man encounters, your First Nations Alaska Native, and your tribal council member from Dillingham, Alaska, which is just awesome that you have that connection. You can really be connected to the stories that you are recording and reporting. So it's awesome, Fred. And remind me the area that you are based out of. Is it Dillingham then?
I'm from there. I'm from Bristol Bay. I currently live in Wasilla, Alaska. There's no job opportunities in Bristol Bay unless it's seasonal, because a lot of the good jobs there, whether it be hospital or otherwise, are already taken. So it's just not a very financially viable place to live year round.
Gotcha. Yeah. And from what I've gathered from other interviews, it can be a pretty hostile environment to live in Alaska, but it is a beautiful environment, but it's also it can be a very unforgiving. You don't get too many chances up there.
Yeah. Like I tell people all the time, Alaska don't care. It really don't. It's irrelevant what you're prepared for. You never know what you're going to get up here. It's always different.
Absolutely. I'd be curious, Fred, what was it that first brought you into being so interested and involved with recording and reporting these encounters? Do you remember a time in your life when you were first introduced to this concept of the Alaskan hairy man?
Oh, geez, I was a little kid. My auntie, when we were young, we always had fish camp, hunting camp, and so on in the village. And when we were really young, we were too young to participate in pulling and hauling nets and picking fish. So one of our aunties would watch us during those months. And like especially my Aunt Lucy, she was one of the most boisterous and outspoken people when it came to watching out for the hairy man, because it wasn't just mythological folklore. It was a fact of life, just no different than beware of a moose at the end of the driveway. It may stomp you to death type of thing. So she would always warn us about, don't follow strange whistles into the woods. Don't go into the woods alone. Don't turn your back on the woods. Don't be out after dark. The hairy man will get you, and as a kid hearing these things, over and over, being a little kid, I thought I was savvy, and I thought they were just trying to keep us from having fun. And so in 1983, I remember it clearly. I snuck away from the group that was in the front yard of my grandma's house. Her property was right at the end of the runway next to the Dillingham airport at the time by Squaw Creek side. And I snuck away from the group because I wanted to work on my tree fort. And so I'm approximately about 120 yards away from my grandma's house on this little trail. And it was open, but about 70 yards in front of me, there was a big bunch of willows. And they're about 10, 12 foot tall, roughly. And I had my path I had to take through those willows to get to where I was building my tree fort. And I was about 70 yards from it. And I was staring at my feet at the time. I remember it clear as day. And something just told me, look up. And when I looked up, I saw this big shadow in the willows. And I immediately, my Uncle Leo was like 6'2". So I thought it was him at first. And I thought, oh, crap, I'm going to be in trouble. And it wasn't my Uncle Leo. This thing screamed at me. The most blood-curdling, just scary thing I dealt with at that time. And I turned around and ran back. Of course, I got in trouble for it and whatnot. And then a little bit later that season in the fall, we went up the Nushegak River on a 32-foot Rawson fishing boat, and we used that as our base camp for moose hunting at the end of fishing season because my family was deeply involved in commercial salmon fishing. And so we would use that big boat as our base camp. We would anchor out in the river and use a small skiff to go and get our moose and whatnot. And we had this A-frame built in the back of it on the stern side to where we had a tarp over it, and we could hang our moose meat and it wouldn't get rained on and it could hang and all that kind of stuff, right? So we were on our way back from hunting camp, basically, and there was a handful of us younger cousins, a few older cousins that were in their mid to late teens, and two of my uncles and my dad. And we got stuck on a gravel bar just at Black Bluff by Angel Bay, which is the tidal area of the Nushegak going into Nushegak Bay from the river. And it's right where the fresh water meets the ocean water. And we were stuck. There was no way we were getting off until the tide came in. And so one of my older cousins, after a little while, the adults were stressing that they didn't want the boat to tip over and then potentially, take on water when the tide comes in. So they were working things out, how to stabilize the boat and all this so it didn't tip or whatever. But one of my older cousins was like, let me get the younger kids out of your hair. I'll take them sport fishing, with rod and reel in the skiff and, get them out of your hair, basically. So we all got our fishing poles into the skiff and we're backing away from the boat. And there was a lot of commotion because you got the outboard running, you got the adults on the boat still talking. And us kids, we were just concerned about fishing. We're all excited or whatever. And there was this screaming going on, but we weren't putting two and two together. And then we were hearing this splashing going on. And my dad and my uncles were sitting there screaming, waving us back. We came back to the stern of the boat, and immediately they were taking us kids off as quickly as possible. And when we all got on deck and we were going into the basically the cabin of the boat where the wheelhouse is, the screaming was really, really loud. And we noticed because one of our other cousins was pointing up to the Black Bluff, which was about 70 yards away and about 65 feet above us, roughly. And there was a silhouette up there of a hairy man, and he was screaming and started throwing rocks. And, everyone, they were concerned, of course, because it's throwing rocks, but none of the rocks were hitting the boat yet. And then one broke through the tarp and hit a piece of moose hindquarter that was hanging there so hard it snapped off of its line and fell to the deck. And immediately they rushed us downstairs, and, there was a bunch of gunfire going on, and we'd hear screaming, rocks thrown, and, another volley of fire. And that was basically where the reality of what we were dealing with really sunk in as far as the dangers, because seeing something at a distance versus seeing its aggression, or, the potential of that aggression, play out in front of you is really, really eye-opening. But we ended up, sequestered down even lower into the sleeping quarters, which wasn't very big. And I couldn't tell you how long the screaming and the gunshots went on, but it went on for a while, because they would shoot it, it would fall down, it would get right back up and throw more rocks, from what I heard later. And eventually we fell asleep down underneath there. And when we woke back up, we were at the, Dillingham boat harbor. And, my uncles and my dad were telling my mom and aunties, everything that happened and whatnot. But that was some of the most intense portions of my childhood. There was other sightings, berry picking and whatnot. And something a lot of people don't realize, I was talking to someone from the village earlier today. Our heritage is so steeped in these supposed mythological folklore, whatever you want to call it, but it's day-to-day life in for a lot of villagers, even to this day. And it's hard to convey that sometimes, because a lot of people, they're raised, Boy Scouts, and, they get out to national parks to get their fill of getting into the woods and whatnot. And up here, you step outside, we don't have any park boundaries that animals abide by. I get moose, bear, fox, all that. They come through my yard. You know what I mean? So it's a different dynamic up here. It's totally different. And when it comes to things like the hairy man, little people, Kushtaka, whatever you want to call the otter man, there's moose man. There's a bunch of different stories, if you want to call it that, but they're all based in reality. And I think a lot of people just chalk that up to, oh, that's just mythological talk. That's just, keep kids in line and this and that. And it's not the case, because I know of many villagers that could go on for days about hairy man experiences they've had, or their relative has had, or, so on and so forth. So it's really, it's basically day-to-day life for a lot of people in the village.
That story you just told me, it sounded like, so did they actually hit the hairy man with their shots, do you think?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%. It according to what I was told later, it just kept getting back up and throwing more rocks.
Wow.
We come from a long line of subsistence hunters. When we're shooting, it's not braggadocio. We shoot to kill and make it quick. It's we're not out there to take 20 shots on an animal just to wound it. We're from the mindset of one shot, one kill. My dad's a Vietnam vet. My uncles were non-vets. They're well versed when it comes to shooting, and the distance that thing wasn't all that far.
Wow. The stories that you've heard over the years, has anyone actually been able to successfully shoot one so that it will be, they got a specimen, or is it a thing where you'll try to shoot it and every time it just keeps getting back up?
Well, no, I shared a story that a Tlingit elder shared with me. His name was Thomas. He's since passed, but he happened to have dispatched, we'll call it, 3 of them over the course of a decade. One time, the first time was in the Tongass. They were there for a logging job and what have you. The second time was up the Copper River Valley. And the third time was between Selawik and Kalstag, where he dispatched one. And what he relayed to me, and this was just about a year ago that he had shared this with me, or a little over a year, it was a headshot through the ear or in the eye. That was the only way to get them to stay down and basically die. The first one they buried, the second one they burned, and the third one, he claimed that he had cut it up and disposed of its body parts, some of it in a cave and its torso back at the end of a valley. So there's that. Now, this gentleman was in his 90s. He had nothing to gain, by sharing that. He was mainly just trying to educate me because I told him my experience and how my shots were ineffective. And that's when he stopped me and was like, you got to shoot him in the soft tissue, neck, eyes, ear, something like that in order to get them to basically stop.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors. That is extreme. Wow, that's extremely detailed in ways I've never heard before on that show. And you said Tlingit Elder, and that reminds me. Yeah, I've talked to a gentleman before. Was that close to Prince of Wales Island?
Not horribly far from it.
I think the Tlingit Elders were involved with that area too, from what I remember. But the Southeast Alaska area is very intense with, I believe they say there's tribes of four-toed Sasquatch that are seen down there. Is that anything that you've run into before in any stories that you've gathered?
I've heard those accounts. Yeah, I've heard of those accounts. I talked to natives from all across the state, and you get accounts of 3 toes, 4 toes, 5, and even 6 toed. But typically, when you hear of the 6 toe prints, they're like 24 inches long and a good foot wide. So to me, that's more along the lines of what we'd call a mountain giant. And there's accounts of those as well. And you still hear accounts from up near Ruby, up on the Yukon, where villagers will hear the trumpeting of like elephants, and they claim to have seen mammoths in recent history within the last decade. That is something I would love to explore. to see a woolly mammoth live and in person, just out in the middle of nowhere, that would be an experience.
That's incredible. So you've talked to people that have personally encountered like the sounds of woolly mammoths, you're saying, or?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Villagers from Ruby and Galena, right on the Yukon River, within 15 miles of the river is what I was told.
Man, that's wild. I mean, you never know the stories you hear out of the Yukon, and I've heard other things as well. And just that area is so remote, so wild. Man, it's crazy. And you'd mentioned mountain giants as well. Man, that's a new one I hadn't heard of either. Right.
There was a guy, he was spotting for moose or caribou. I forget what it was, but he said he had one of those big old, I forget the power on it, but it was one of those huge spotting scopes where you can easily see a mile away. You know what I mean? And he was spotting, and he noticed this big grayish green thing moving, and it looked like it was trees on its back. And he said it was about 30 foot tall, and it had like a mane going down its back. It was grayish green, had hair down its forearms and kind of cuffed around its wrist, and was a little longer around the wrist, the hair was. He said the back kind of reminded him of a snapping turtle, with the splines on the back or whatever.
Sure.
And he said it kind of looked like that, but it was more like a bristly type of hair down the back. It had tusks from the lower jaw protruding up next to the nostrils. And he said it just moved nonchalant. And he was just in awe watching this thing from roughly a mile away. And he heard a bush plane in the distance. And he looked to find out where the plane was. And he spotted the plane. Then he looks back. And this thing, as he looked back, he saw just the tail end of this thing crunching down to the ground, and it blended in perfectly with the scenery. So when this thing was moving, it heard the plane as well and just kind of laid low, stayed still, and you wouldn't even see it.
That's incredible, man. I wonder if anyone has ever captured actual like video evidence or anything of creatures like that. That's a new subject for me, man.
Well, I've personally seen footage of little people. I've personally seen way better footage in 4K resolution of a Sasquatch. There's a homestead down on the peninsula, and these people contacted me about a year ago. They had started getting goats because they wanted goats to keep the land clear, the undergrowth kind of, to a minimum. And they had a couple small pens, and they had just basically started their homestead on about 5 to 6 acres roughly. And one of their goats came up missing one day. And so the husband went out, kind of looked around, saw some weird tracks, thought it was a double bear impression, And so, okay, it's a bear. So he kind of went outside of the property, scouting around, couldn't really find anything, no blood trail, no sign of this missing goat. Comes back. That evening, he saw a dark shadow in the trees and just fired around up into the trees to scare whatever this large looming thing was. He assumed it was a bear on its hind feet. Well, the thing disappeared. No harm, no foul kind of thought process. And the next morning when they were drinking coffee at their table, they heard a loud, just this monstrous scream that ended in a high pitch. And this thing had took their second goat, ripped it in half, and threw both halves at the cabin one after another. And that got their attention because they heard the scream. They saw what was left of the goat smacked up against their cabin. And so once it got a little lighter outside, he went out to investigate. Nothing was going on. It was dead quiet. He got rid of the remains of the goat and kind of looked for more sign of what the hell this was. They had called the authorities at that point. The authorities told them, hey, bears are around, keep your goats close, put up electrical fence, just basically shined them on. Wasn't listening to the scream part of it. They just blew it off. And later on that day, he was out in their front yard with his daughter. And this is rustic. It was freshly cleared, so it's not like they had a manicured lawn or anything, but they did have a fence up. It was about 40 feet from their front window where the fence started, and that was basically their front lawn. And he was out there with his daughter, and they heard a scream, and so he stood still, put his daughter behind him, and on video, the video portion I saw was the wife recording from inside, from a little Sony Handycam, and this Sasquatch walked between that fence and this guy who had his daughter behind him, and this thing was looking at him with such disdain and like hatred, like he wanted to end him, but for some reason he couldn't kind of look. And you can see clearly on video, this thing just walked on by, stepped over the fence, and went off into the trees. I tried for months to get them to release that footage anonymously. I told them I'd leave their names out, I'd blur faces, I would do whatever I had to do to make them at ease to release this footage, and they wouldn't budge. And, I wasn't going to put on a bunch of high-pressure tactics. That was their footage, it was their thing. I just left it at that. But I still wish I could get my hands on that footage because, the Patterson Gimlin footage is great, but this is on a different level of clarity. You can see the muscle movement clearly. You can damn near count individual hairs on this thing. And its face was very defined, very clear. It was just amazing footage. And unfortunately, they want no part of it. They want, not even anonymously, they want to share. They were just asking my advice on how to keep them away from their property. And that's as far as they wanted to take it, unfortunately.
That is a shame, but you do have to respect, as they are the owners of the footage. But it sounds like footage like that could totally, to a lot of people could prove the existence of the creature, I would imagine. I mean, it would probably make a few people change their mind, but wow.
Oh, yeah.
Oof.
Yeah, and it's intense. I saw it with my own eyes in their cabin, in the same living room they filmed it from. And that, I tried to, you know, I was trying to be as, you know, unintrusive as possible, but firm in trying to express to them, look, a lot of people can gain from this, not financially, but just knowledge-wise on the realities of what you're dealing with. You know, it could lead to more help, because the best I could tell you is, you know, maybe put up some IR floodlights and, you know, stay in at night. You know, that's the best advice I could give, you know, outside of outright shooting the thing. And they wanted no part of that either. I offered to come in with a team of guys and take a look around. They wanted no part of that. You know, they were basically hoping that I had the silver bullet, so to speak, for their situation and, you know, would make it all go away. But unfortunately, I don't have that, you know.
Can you describe, you know, when you looked at that video and you saw that footage, what did you see in the face of the creature?
It looked more Neanderthal than ape. Very similar to what I saw in '06, just not quite as big. This thing was about 10 foot tall. I would say the shoulder width, just looking at the footage, and the husband's height, I would say his shoulders were about 4.5 foot wide. Arms hung down just above the knee. The forearm was longer than the upper arm. The hands were huge. The jaw was really big, wide, and pronounced. You could tell that its teeth, if it were showing them, it protruded out further than the nose. Ash gray colored skin, pitch black eyes, real wrinkly faced. You could tell under the hair with the movement, the muscle definition was like these bodybuilders you see that are just, you can see every sinew and every fiber of muscle under their skin. It was very similar to that, just coated in this hair. It was about 4.5 inches long for the most part, but the upper part of the head had a little bit of longer hair. So it would look like half rocker style on the hair, on the head, but then it all went down to a shorter length on the rest of its body. The genitalia was basically covered by hair. You could tell it was a big male, but it wasn't like its junk was hanging or anything like that. It was just a lot of hair in that area. The upper part of the leg looked longer than the lower part. And you could easily see in the footage when it was stepping, because I got the opportunity to watch it about 4 or 5 different times. You could see the foot almost looked like it was flopping because of that mid-tarsal break, the way it was walking. Just an anthropologist would kill their firstborn to have this footage to study. It's great. And I told them if they weren't going to share it, I would destroy it. Just what I told them, because I would never, give away their name or their exact location. I just wouldn't betray them like that. But, I tried to reach out to them just a few months ago to see how they were doing, but I didn't get a response. I think for a lot of people, once they get some kind of confirmation that they're not crazy, they want nothing more to do with it.
I agree with you. That lines up with, people I've talked to, is a lot of times they just want to share what they've experienced so they can go to sleep at night and feel like they're not crazy. I totally get it. My goodness.
Right. Because, on my channel right now, I have 172 videos. If I was able to share every encounter shared with me, that, if they were open to it, even if they remained anonymous, I would have 400 or 500 encounters on my channel. It's just a lot of people, they want to talk to someone who ain't going to judge them and get it off their chest. And it seems like a lot of them, once they get it off their chest, they can let it go, so to speak. They, you know, for some people, speaking it out loud, because a lot of the people I interview, I talk to them 3, 4, 5 times just so I get their encounter down. So when I relay it in a video, I can give the finer details. I can walk them, you know, the viewer through it to where they feel like they're in that place at that time. And, you know, talking to the people, it helps me, for one. It's kind of like a form of therapy, but also it helps the listener to better understand, you know, terrain, time of day, circumstances, all that kind of thing, versus if I was just like, let's say, reading an email verbatim. You know what I mean? Because those finer details and nuances, you're not going to pick up in an email. You get that from talking to them, the inflection in their voice when they're talking about their encounter, whether there was a comical moment or, you know, outright deadly type of feeling that they felt.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
You know, there was a federal investigator. His name's Robert Johnson. He shared his name willingly. His video is Unknown Fear in Denali, right? So when I talked to him, he said, you can use my name because I didn't see anything. He was at the White Moose Lodge in Ely, Alaska, just right there at Denali. He was on a motorcycle trip up visiting his son or whatever. He ended up having to stay there because of heavy rain. But there was a banging on the back of that hotel that scared him. Now, this is an investigator, anti-terror, been to the sandbox, as he put it, you know, counterterrorism, well-trained, been through the trenches with, you know, combat vet, basically. And this thumping, this banging on the back of this hotel scared him to his core. He said he didn't understand it because he didn't see anything, but just the presence of this thing and feeling the power behind the banging on the wall scared him. And to me, that speaks volumes. If someone that's been through something like that can be scared to their core, like a little child who's been through that to me, it says a lot about the creature we're dealing with up here. It's not your forest friend. They're not here to help you with anything. Type of creature, you know, and that's one of the driving forces on why I want to share Alaskan experiences, is because what we deal with up here is far removed from some of the encounters you may hear about down in the States. You know, it's a totally different environment. I think they're more aggressive because the seasons up here are so short. It's already in the fall. It's already been below freezing, you know, in the mornings already. Because of that short cycle we have up here, I think they're a lot more vicious because of the limited resources that can be attained in that short amount of time. So you get a lot of encounters from moose hunters, caribou hunters, salmon fishermen, berry pickers. You know, every resource people go out to attain up here is typically an encounter location, you know, or a potential encounter location. I get accounts all the time from the villages, like the ones outside of Bethel, Russian Mission, Mountain Village, you know, places like this where out berry picking, these things have been known to try to lure women away, you know, with this slow motion wave. I've had a young lady in her early 20s share with me not too long ago where they were just checking the conditions of the berries to see if they're almost ripe for picking, her and her little cousin. And they're in the wide open tundra, nothing around. They get to this, it was basically a horseshoe-shaped trail. They get to the apex of it roughly, and all of a sudden, there's this hairy man about 70-ish feet away, roughly. And initially, she said she was almost in a trance-like state, like she felt peaceful with this thing waving at her. And she's on a four-wheeler with her little cousin. So the trail they were on was well-defined. You know, you got your trenches from the tread tires of the many four-wheelers that have been through there before. And she veered off, and she bumped her knee getting off of that trail, and it snapped her out of that trance. And she saw it for what it was and realized the danger and, you know, skedaddled out of there. So you get accounts like that. Like, what are we really dealing with? It's something that can put you in a trance-like state, you know, especially the vulnerable women and children. It's real creepy, man. You know, and I got no answer for it. It's just creepy stuff.
Have you ever heard of people being lured by the sound of a baby crying in the woods?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard the baby crying myself.
You have?
Oh, yeah. My cousin, Elizabeth Osterhaus, now Elizabeth Cook, back in 1967 or 69, one of the two, she lived down on Unalaska Island. No trees. It's a windswept Dutch harbor. You know, it's just windswept. You may get some scrub brush, but that's it. They had a neighbor, a young Native woman who had a child out of wedlock at the time with a fisherman. The fisherman went away, and she was left with this baby. And so she would always ask for help from her neighbors and whatnot. But this baby's cry, everyone knew it because it was a colicky young baby, and the mom didn't know what it was doing. You know, she was doing, and so she would ask for help. And it was going into dusk, getting dark, and they heard this baby crying outside. They knew the cry, and they recognized it. Well, they go outside, her and another cousin, to look to see what was going on with the baby crying, you know, making sure the baby didn't need help. And they get outside, they go around, they don't see anything, and they're going back into their little apartment, and right in front of the bay window, 10 feet away, looking at him, is this hairy man imitating that baby cry to a T, to perfection. She said that it sounded identical to the baby cry. Now, to me, that's a level of cunning that is just unreal, because they're literally using a woman's natural instinct against them. They're using that baby cry to lure them out. That is some cunning stuff, man. Just cunning.
Go ahead.
No, it just boggles my mind, you know, and that's why we're raised up here. You know, there's nothing good that comes. We were never raised to follow them. We were never raised to track them. So when I got into this YouTube thing and I started going to look around, it was hard for me to get into it because culturally and the way I was raised for so many years, we didn't follow. We weren't out to, you know, take photos of tracks because we saw them often enough. You know, we weren't out to capture video footage because we seen them often enough. It wasn't on our to-do list. It wasn't a big deal. It was just what it was, you know. So it's been kind of a strange transition doing what I'm doing now. It's just different because culturally, the way I was raised, it's night and day difference. Because I still talk to elders that are like, you know, they'll tell me, you know better than to go look for them. You know, nothing good will come of it. And you know, I heed their warnings, but yet I feel it's important. I feel it's a public safety issue. You know, people go out there. You know, I've talked to hunters, man, that have been going to the same spot for 40 plus years, never had an issue, never heard nothing crazy, never seen nothing crazy, but 20-minute experience, and they will never go back there again. They've given up hunting. They won't even go out in the woods because it's just one random encounter. And that's all it takes. And that's another thing that boggles my mind is the randomness. You can have a group of 100 guys go to the same spot every year for their caribou. None of them have an issue. Then 1 year, one of them will have an issue. Their caribou gets taken. They have a sighting or whatever, and it's done for them. They no longer go hunting. You know, it's just so random in nature.
I want to address something really quick. If listeners heard me have like an interesting reaction a little bit ago, I just was having such just the picture I had in my mind of the hairy man imitating the baby cry and the person seeing that actually happen. That's something that, man, even if you're imagining it, that I can't imagine actually seeing that in person. That's not a good thing to see.
No, not at all. And she's in her late 80s now, and she still gets an expression on her face of almost like shell shock about it, you know. And that happened back in 69. You know what I mean? Like these okay, with my channel, I share people's encounters, and the way I do it is the way I was raised. We have an oral history, an oral tradition. We don't write things down. We just pass it down, verbally. And so that's why I treat the encounters. If anyone watches my channel, they know what I'm talking about. I try to bring the listener into that moment, and that's what our elders did with us, whether it be, caribou hunting. We were up here, we took the third slough on the right, and you go up past the berry patches, you get into the scrub brush, and, you'll find the caribou back over there. The level of detail we were raised with when sharing information with each other it wasn't to, I'm going to share all the details. It was life and death. You know what I mean? It had to be accurate information. And that's why I get upset with those who claim oral history is just that. It's fanciful, it's folklore, it's mythology, that kind of crap. That's so inaccurate. Our oral tradition and our oral history allowed us to live this long. I mean, Cambridge was built in 1692, Harvard. Okay, the first brick and mortar that everyone touts, their education from. Well, our oral history goes back a millennia past that, even further. So, when the educated get this idea that, because they learned something in a book, therefore it has more relevance and validation versus something that was passed on orally, I scoff at that. That's the level of arrogance that is just, I don't go for that crap. You know what I mean? Because it's dismissive. They want to call it archaic, whatever, and just chalk it up to folklore, and that's not the case. It's not the case at all.
That's extremely interesting. I've never thought of it that way before, but that is very, very cool. Fred, so you mentioned earlier how there are these times in your early childhood where you experience things and saw things. Were there times also as you got into adulthood where, you had experiences that kind of cemented it into your mind at an older age as well?
Oh, yeah, several different times. But okay, let me break down for you. So
sure.
We would see them at a distance on a regular basis. Now, I'm not saying every day, but on a regular enough basis, we would see them at a distance. And usually what would happen in those occurrences they would either run off or scream at us and break something. We would run off, and it was always at a distance. It was never like right up on us, except for a few times in passing, but it was always just inside a vehicle, just inside a house, things like that, to where they would typically leave or we would leave. In 95, me and my cousin Spencer and a couple other people, we were looking for woodland caribou. They're a little bigger than your standard caribou, what you would call a reindeer. And we were checking these alpine meadows where some locals said, hey, they mill around up there. If you go up there and look, you'll probably find one. So we wanted one. And so we're up there on foot. We had beached our skiff, and we walked up this hill, and they're sloping kind of like steps as we're going up to each of these little alpine meadows. And we got up to the most upper one in this portion of basically the Wood River Mountains. And we got up to this step, and it was a lot of grass and muskeg, just the beginnings of like probably an ancient beaver pond, I would guess, because of how the land laid. But it was all grass through there, and there was trees off to our right-hand side about 80 yards away, roughly. And these are black spruce, so they're not very big, and, they're just, they were there. Well, when we get up there was no wind, and the grass was about 4 foot tall. And so we're looking around for a sign of caribou, and the wind blew from behind us and started, the grass moved like you would see a wave crash against the beach. You know what I mean? And this grass was moving, and this one portion didn't move. It was a female Sasquatch, and it was squatted down. And if the wind hadn't blown, we would have never seen her. But the wind blew, we noticed, and immediately she stood up because the gig was up. We saw her. She stood up. She basically had a caramel kind of dead grass color, and she was darker on the lower portion of her body. But once we saw her, she made eye contact, stood there briefly, and let out this scream as she ran from our left to our right, very fast, very, very fast. But her coloring was such that as soon as she hit those black spruce, she blended in seamlessly like a baby duckling in the grass. You know what I mean? Just natural camouflage made it appear that she disappeared, but she was still there. You heard her crash through the trees and stuff, and she was still bellowing and screaming, running away.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
And that was typically what we would deal with out in the bush, typically. You know, sometimes villagers will say it stole my fish or this and that, you know, but never, for the most part, you didn't hear about outright attacks, right? When you did, it was always second, third hand. You know, so-and-so went missing, you know, hairy man attack or whatever. And you didn't disbelieve. You just basically thought, oh, well, at least it wasn't me, you know, kind of frame of thought. Up until 2006, I would have told you they scream, they break stuff, you leave, they throw stuff every once in a while, they may come around your house, but they eventually leave, just leave them alone. You know, that was my mindset up until 2006. And what happened in 2006 is it actually started in 2004 when my uncle, he wanted to go gold prospecting, and he knew he had to get portable sluice box, you know, everything portable because, you know, we had limited capacity in a 22-foot skiff, and he wanted to be efficient. And so it took a couple seasons for him to accrue all this stuff. And in 2006, at the end of the fishing season, he said, "This is the year. You got the time?" I said, "Sure do, Uncle. You know, just name the time." Well, he wanted to leave September 12th, and that's my birthday. So I asked if we could leave the 13th so I could be in civilization, at least some part of civilization, for my 31st birthday. You know, and he was like, "Okay, we'll leave the 13th." So we left Dillingham the 13th of September in 2006. And we launched from Squaw Creek, and we went up the Nushegak River. And it's roughly 248 river miles to the Nushegak River where we were going. And that was a couple days process because my uncle was in his mid to late 60s at that time, and he would get cold on the water. So we stopped in Nushegak, visited with family for a day or so, and then went upriver, refueled at Cunning, and then continued on up to the Nushegak. And we got to the Nushegak September 17th, and it was a couple hours before dark. We had got there, and me and my cousin, we wanted to run up and down the river real quick and just check things out. But because it was getting late and had the boat to unload, we opted to wait till the next day. So we unload everything, and we weren't loud, we weren't boisterous, we weren't partying it up or just randomly shooting guns off in the woods or anything like that. We just unloaded the skiff and went into this little salmon counting tower shack. It was 8-foot square. Everything was made with minimal cutting because in remote Alaska, by state law, you can't have any permanent structures. So this thing was on skids. So it's an 8-foot square. It's 5/8 plywood on 2x4 studs. Minimal construction. I mean, bare minimum. Is basically a dried-in shell. And on the back side of this place was a 50s style eggshell kind of looking camper. You know the kind I'm talking about, a little tow behind.
Yes.
Well, the front of that had been cut off and mounted to the back side of this little shack, and all the windows were blacked out in that back portion. Yeah, it was a bunk area because land of the midnight sun, it stays light out damn near day and night. And so and when you step in the door, as you come up the bank, it's about 20 feet to the front of this place, and it's about a 6-7 foot climb because it's on a cut bank to get to the, to the top of the bank there. And when you're looking at the place, if you're looking directly at it from the front, the door is to the left-hand side of it. There's an old oil drum stand to the right-hand side. And again, this is only 8 foot wide. And so when you open this door, it's flimsy. It's 2x4 on 5/8 plywood. All it had was this little J hook to keep the door shut, and a little bit of a old piece of driftwood screwed into the 2x4 as a handle. So when you step in, there's a little card table immediately to your left, right there, and an 18 by 20 inch window right above it. And mirroring that window across on the other side was a little miniature sink, a little tiny sink that drained right to the outside, and another 18 by 24 inch window on that side. And then you got the little entryway dead center on the back side that went into this 50s style trailer. So we get in there, we unload everything, and my uncle cooks for us. He made some salmon head chowder and whatnot, and we had gotten done eating. And that year I had spent some of my fishing money on a brand new Remington 870 shotgun. It was a rifled barrel. It was going to be my slug gun, just a gun for the brush. And I was real happy with it. But the rear sight, I was trying to adjust it. And because I had shot it a couple times going upriver, and I noticed that the sight was off a little bit. So as I was doing the adjustments, at this point in time, my uncle and my cousin are playing cribbage at this little table. And we got a Coleman lantern going because it's about a half hour after dark at this point. And as we're sitting there talking, my uncle's giving us instruction on, I want a couple buckets of pay dirt from over here that I want to try to sample and this and that, because his overall goal was to basically stake a claim. And this is just south of the proposed Pebble Mine, which is, according to what they say, the largest gold and copper reserves in the world. Okay, so there's a reason for that, because there's gold everywhere over there, right? So that his idea was to basically start a gold mine, but just start small and see what we could find. It was his line of thinking. So he's giving us instruction on where he wants the buckets and this and that, and I'm still dinking with this rear sight. Well, as he's talking, all of a sudden the whole place kind of shifts. It just made this creaking kind of sound, right? And so there was no wind blowing, because again, this is just a glorified box. We would have known that the wind was blowing, you know what I mean? And there was no wind blowing. So when I look over at my cousin, where he's sitting, he's got the window behind him, and between his shoulder and the top of that window, I saw dark movement. And the way I looked over there, he jumps up and says, "Hey, that ain't funny." And I was like, no, there was movement. So we're on a salmon river, right? There was spawn outs in the river as we're coming up, So we immediately thought bear. I mean, it was the only thing that made sense. Hairy man wasn't on our mind. It had, because it was around, we just, superstition-wise, when it comes to most villagers, they don't talk about it because it could bring a bad omen. And so there's a lot of superstition involved. So it was nothing we actually openly talked about a lot of times. So he grabs a 30-06. I got that shotgun, and we had one of those million candle-watt powered, 6-volt spotlights, right? Fresh battery in it. We opened that door, and to our right would be the riverbank, and to our left, about 50 yards away, would be the tree line. And so immediately I point to the side where we saw the movement. Well, where I saw the movement. There's nothing there, and we beamed towards our left, and we're only about a step outside of this door, maybe a foot and a half. We're shoulder to shoulder. We got guns ready. We're going to scare this bear off. And as I pan to the left, once we hit the tree line to our left, we come across 3 sets of eye shine, and the eye shine was red. We could see these creatures. Their eyes were huge. They reminded me of fence post markers. Those 3-inch fence post markers? They were that big. And immediately, shock took over. It seemed, it was ominous. An instant feeling of dread. because typically from what we've experienced before, you beam a flashlight at them, they kind of duck behind a tree, they kind of try to hide themselves. Well, these three didn't move. They just stood there. So we ducked right back inside, and I shut that little J-hook. And what was really weird is it felt like we put on earmuffs as soon as we went in back inside and I shut that little J-hook. It was like everything was muffled. I was talking, and it's, have you ever been on a plane where your ears haven't fully popped, so the person sitting next to you sounds like, they're right there, but they sound kind of far away?
Oh, yeah.
It was that kind of feeling. And so I'm talking, and I'm talking to my cousin. I was like, as I'm talking to my cousin about, you saw what I saw, right? And I tell him, Uncle, there's a hairy man out there. There's three of them. As I'm saying that, within a moment, my cousin's on my left shoulder, and he's holding the barrel of that 30-06 with his hands kind of like just down. He had the butt of the gun down between his feet. I had just set the spotlight down, and I'm holding that shotgun in my left hand, kind of offhanded, trying to discuss what we're seeing. And all of a sudden, my cousin is, bam, underneath that card table, had a death grip on that barrel. And he's kind of moving his arms up and down like he was churning butter a little bit. And he had wet himself and was just kind of not writhing around, but kind of twitchy a little bit. And he's looking towards the opposite side, towards that window. But me and my uncle look at each other. We look down at him. We look back at each other. And we realize he's looking across the little room to that other window by the sink. So I'm literally about 3 feet from this window. And we both turn at the same time. And once I made eye contact with this, once my eyes made contact with this thing, I could tell it was looking at my cousin. But as soon as I was looking at it, it turned its gaze at me and furrowed its brow. I only saw from the bottom of its nose to the top of its eyebrow in that 18-inch space. It had ash gray skin. Its eyes were like black translucent marbles. There was a slight glow to them from the Coleman lantern, but it wasn't like a full-on eye shine. It was a little dulled down. Within 2 milliseconds, I immediately knew what it felt like to be prey. I knew what it felt like to be the rabbit in the hole with the wolf outside. It wasn't no mind speak. It was in the air. It was something about the energy in the air was that of death, like, and the way it looked at me and furrowed its brow to kind of like glare right at me. Within milliseconds, it's taken way longer to explain it than how it happened, because I turned, it gave me that look, and it started moving out of view of the window towards my right, and I just shot through the wall right there 3 times with that shotgun. And what was weird is I discharged a shotgun in this small room, and there was no ringing of the ears. It just sounded like a thump, 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 because of that pressure and this pressure I'm referring to, it stayed the whole time during this whole encounter. So it was constant. It didn't vary. It didn't get less or heavier. It was a constant. But so I shoot the 3 times, and immediately there's a scream and a simultaneous shift of this place. And, I thought it was going to push us in the river. We're less than 20 feet from the bank. I really thought we're going in the river, but there's this scream that was so loud, it shook everything in there. That pot that the stew was made in, it rang like a tuning fork from the scream. The lantern was swinging. It almost took me off my feet, and everything went quiet. There was no more sound. My cousin wasn't responding. My uncle said a couple things, but he basically went and sat in the bunk room there, and I'm freaking out. I was yelling at them to help me. I felt all alone, and I'm amongst some of the most hardcore subsistence hunters that I have ever known. My cousin, for example, he was shoulder to shoulder with me with a charging sow, you know, over 800-pound female brown bear charging us. He stood his ground. And to see him, he had wet himself, he's babbling underneath the table, and my uncle isn't engaging me. And so I knew it wasn't over. Like, something within me, I knew we couldn't just, oh, okay, let's call it a night, start fresh in the morning kind of thing, because that wasn't what was happening. The energy was very ominous. It was dead quiet. So what I ended up doing is I slid one of the chairs over by that stupid little flimsy door for whatever good that would do. And I took the other chair and I put it right at the opening of that little cubby. And I basically sat there in that chair listening to that Coleman lantern hiss. I don't know if you've ever dealt with them, the white gas Coleman lantern. You got to pump them every once in a while.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
But I sat there for, gosh, had to have been 5-6 hours, periodically asking for help. The only reason I was able to stop shaking like uncontrollably was I resigned myself to death. I had to literally, I'm a dead man. I had to accept it, and and that was the only way I could rationally think. I staged a bunch of ammo. I tried to get the 30-06 for my cousin, but it was loaded and he wasn't letting go. He still wasn't responding. He was still in la la land, and my uncle was basically shut down. He wasn't saying much. He had his Bible. He was being quiet. He had basically no advice to offer, and he wasn't engaging whatsoever. And so I sat there, pumping that lantern every once in a while. I was gripping that shotgun so hard that it hurts my hands. I would have to let go and shake life back into my hands because my hands, I was gripping it so hard. And, you know, when a moth would hit the window, oh my God. There were several times I almost Swiss cheese that place from the inside out just from a moth hitting the window. There was moments of time where I was just screaming out loud, you know, effing come get me, you know, various things. Just, it was rough. Because I was there with two other people I loved, but no one was helping me, you know? And so, and I'm guesstimating because I was in fits of terror, you know? So the time frame of how long I sat there without my cousin responding, I'm guessing 5 to 6 hours, it give or take. Because again, I wasn't fully in my right mind. But I knew in my heart of hearts, I couldn't just go lay down and call it a night. I just shot this thing through the wall, and I don't know what else is coming, you know? We saw the 3 sets of eye shine. This one was looking in the window at us. So I knew it was going on. Whatever was happening, and it's going to be what it's going to be kind of thing. Once my cousin did start coming out of his stupor, and it took a while because he was incoherent. He was babbling stuff that made no sense, gibberish. But once he was back more to himself, and I got him talking, we got him changed, and I got him calmed down enough, you know, by reassuring him, I shot it, man. It ran away. I shot it. It's gone. And you know, that helped. It brought peace and calm to him a little bit, but we were still in the middle of it, you know? And I asked him, I was like, what did you see? And once he pulled himself together, he told me that it showed him his teeth. And from what he said, when he was standing next to me and I was talking, he looked out that window and there was enough of the light from the lantern that he saw it. It was a little further away from the window and it showed his teeth and his body shut down. And he said when he was under the table looking, he was trying to tell us, but nothing would come out. He was just seizing up, basically. But that's when it came in closer to the window, and that's when we turned and I saw it. And so we realized we need to get out of there. It was not going to, we didn't want to be there. It was all bad. So we came up with a game plan. We were going to make it to the skiff, which is 25 feet away. It seemed like 10 miles away at the time, but it was literally just not very far. And we were going to drift out of there until we got further downriver because it was pitch black. There was no way to fire up the outboard and safely navigate the river. There's too many deadfall trees, there's rocks, there's all sorts of things that could go wrong on that. So we were going to use the spotlight, our initial plan, to basically keep ourselves going, downstream and, use the oars to kind of steer or whatever. That was our initial plan. And so we're sitting there quiet for a while, and as we're getting up, because it was so quiet, we were getting more brave. We were getting more courage to make this move. And my cousin brings up, let's use the spotlight and see if there's anything outside we can see. So we shut off the lantern because it was creating a mirrored effect inside. You know what I mean? And so with it being pitch black outside, the light inside just made the windows look like mirrors. So we killed that, and we beamed out the riverside first, and we took a really good look. We saw nothing on that side. And believe me, we were really, really looking. And so we went to the other side, and we started at the point we saw the 3 sets of eye shine. And we're beaming, and we see nothing. I mean, there's nothing. It's quiet, dead quiet. And this beam, this spotlight, had a fresh battery. So it's not like, it didn't have the candela. It was bright. And we beam in there, kitty corner off the back side of this shack, about 40 feet. There's this old outhouse that long out of use, but it was about 8.5 foot tall. It was built with minimal cuts, and it had a one-sided roof, but at its highest point, it was about 8.5 feet tall. Once we beamed back to that point, we noticed this big hulking silhouette behind it. It wasn't immediately behind it. It was kind of back a little bit from it. But this silhouette was every bit of 13 to 14 foot tall. It was hulking, 5.5 foot wide, pitch black. The creepiest thing, its size was immense, but it was absorbing the light. It was giving nothing back, no eye shine. Even a black bear, if you beam it with a flashlight at night, it has kind of like that silky kind of chrome copper, kind of reflection to its hide. This gave nothing. It was like it was absorbing all the light. It was like a big black nothing there for us. So it started moving a little bit towards our right. We immediately killed that spotlight, and we're all tucked back into that little cubby, pitch black. We were freaking out. I know we had the barrels crossed because I kept hearing the barrel of my shotgun butting against the barrel of the 30-06, and we stayed like that for, quite a while. Again, just dead quiet. All we saw was that menacing, hulking figure, and we hid, and we heard nothing. So after a while, it being dead quiet, we started reformulating our game plan. And as we're going over it and stuff, off in the near distance, it sounded like rotor wash from a helicopter, that thump, 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 thump sound. Well, we started feeling it in the ground, and what it was one of these things running by the shack. And as soon as it ran by, because we felt it in the ground, and as soon as it ran by, it was like other ones were surrounding the place, and they started running around as well. I don't know if they were trying to draw our fire or see if we were going to shoot again or just outright terrorize us. I don't know. But they ran around, and then it seemed like they would back off, and then they would do it again. And this continued, in the moment, it seemed like about roughly 15 minutes, give or take, because we were white knuckle terror listening to this. And at one point, as the running was going on, it sounded like one of them was sniffing the little trailer attachment to the shack. And it's hard to express the level of sheer terror. Like we were stuck, you know. And again, you know, one of my driving forces or factors that, you know, propel me forward to share people's encounters is they had us dead to rights. They could have smashed that place to nothing in a heartbeat and snatched us out of there, but yet they didn't. They could have, but they didn't. Anyway, just something that dwells on my mind a lot when I think about it is what they could have done, yet they didn't. But anyway, so that goes on for a little while, and then they back off and it gets quiet, like super quiet again. And again, I don't know exactly how much time transpired, but it was starting to get the first glimmers of it getting lighter outside. And with it being quiet for so long, again, we were getting our courage up. We had our game plan down. And it dawned on me at that point that we drug the anchor and bow line from that skiff 50 to 70 yards. It was a long bow line because that skiff was used for a set net site. And so your anchor had to be long enough to hook the bottom and still not get swamped when high tide came in, right? So we had taken that anchor when we first got there and drug it back over onto the tundra and dug it into the tundra. So we're basically tethered into the place. And luckily, just 10 foot of that bow line was chain, and then it went to a regular rope. And so I told my cousin, you know, when you go first, you're going to have to cut that bow line, and I'll make sure that, you know, your dad follows behind me, and I'll keep a guard while you start the outboard and all that stuff, right? That was our game plan. And so we're sitting there and we're just getting our courage up because it's getting lighter out. And all of a sudden, that same side of the wall that the door's on, the front side, it sounded like a pellet gun shooting it. At first, it was just a thap, thap sound, right? And then the cadence increased to where, and then all of a sudden it was like a hailstorm against that side. So again, immediately we retreated back into that cubby. Barrels crossed again. Like, what the hell? It was like every time we were getting up the gumption to make a break for it, it was almost like they sensed it and they would do something to terrorize us. I felt toyed with. I really felt like cat and mouse type of. And so that still bothers me to this day. Anyway, so we're in this cubby and we're all being quiet. And after it's quiet for a while, we start whispering because it's getting lighter outside. And we sat there to where it was light enough where we could easily see the tree line. We couldn't really see into the trees too much because it was still silhouetted, but there was enough daylight to where we could see the open ground. And with it being so quiet for so long after that, we got our courage up. And so my cousin's in front of me, I'm in the middle, and my elder's behind me. And I have the 30-06 at this point. My cousin has his shotgun, and I have my uncle's his 12 gauge old Wingmaster, big old long goose gun. It was a 12 gauge, but I had that slung over my shoulder for more rounds if I needed them, because he was in his 60s. He wasn't indolent, but he wasn't spry. You know what I mean? He kind of walked with a little bit of a hobble. So, you know, I wanted to make sure I had enough firepower on me as possible. So it's quiet. And so, you know, it's go time. So he has my pocket knife. He has to cut that bow line and jump in the skiff and start it. That was our game plan. So we kick the door open and boom, we're at the edge of the bank in no time. My cousin immediately jumps down. I stopped paying attention to him because my uncle's behind me, and it's a 6-7 foot drop on a cut bank. So the dew on the grass and everything was a little slippery, so I had to help him get his footing so he could make it down the bank safely and not just topple over. And the way I positioned myself with his shotgun on my back, the shotgun was kind of pushing me forward, the way I knelt down. So I scooped back about 4 to 6 inches maybe before I stood up to wait for my turn to get down this bank. And as I get up to full standing height, this rock, a little bigger than a basketball, whizzed by the front of my face. Had I not scooted back and I just stood up from where I was, we wouldn't have this conversation, man. As soon as that rock whizzed by in front of my face, everything went slow motion, and my eyes locked on that rock, and it impacted about a part of the river that was about roughly 3 feet deep, fast moving water. It impacted so hard that rock hit the bottom and sounded like a shotgun blast before the water could close over it. I mean, pow! And as soon as I heard that sound, it was like those earmuffs came off, and I could hear clearly again. Everything was still quasi slow motion, but I turned the direction the rock came from. No, this thing was coming out of the tree line 50 yards away.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
That rock had to have been in flight before I started standing up. You know what I mean? It was like, anyway, I turned, and that big black silhouette was coming out of the tree line. It still wasn't giving anything back. I could tell it was moving, but it was like it was gliding. And immediately with that 30-06, I put 3 rounds center mass. Bam, bam, bam. And I heard the bullets impact this thing. Now, this 30-06 is a powerful rifle. Anyone who's hunted knows. We use the same rifle to kill walrus, bear, moose. Everything we've come up against with that rifle, we've killed it. This thing took all 3 rounds, and it didn't flinch or nothing. It just stopped moving forward. It just stopped. It didn't buckle, nothing. Well, once I put those 3 rounds on it and it didn't do anything, I was getting this tunnel vision going on from the shot. Everything was kind of closing in, and I turn around, I jump down, because at this point, my uncle's making his way into the skiff, and the bow line wasn't cut. My cousin got the motor running, but he didn't cut the bow line, so I'm yelling at him, throw me the knife, throw me the knife. He throws the knife. I set the 30-06 into the bow of the skiff, and I'm cutting that line, and I'm telling him, idle down, because he had it the idle too high to shift gears, right? And of course it was cold, and he could only do so much, but it was a tense moment. We're kind of yelling back and forth. And as I cut the bow line and I'm putting the chain in, my uncle's kind of got his butt on the edge, and he's kind of trying to shimmy in. I shoved him in. I felt bad later because it bruised his wrist pretty bad, but I shoved him in. And when I jumped down, I noticed that my cousin had dropped my shotgun right there on the beach on this little small landing where we had the skiff perched. And so in my mind's eye, I was going to grab my shotgun. I don't know why. I never got an answer why he dropped my shotgun on the little beach there. But anyway, so I shoved my uncle in. I'm thinking I'm going to grab that shotgun. And the chain was hanging a little more, so I dumped the rest of the chain in there. And as I'm looking at him, and I'm still yelling at him to idle down, and he idles down and it shifts, right? And all of a sudden, his eyes get real big. My uncle, when he landed, he turned around and was looking back towards the direction of the bank. And they're both looking over my shoulder up at the bank. And I turn around, and as I'm looking up, I saw from just up to about mid-shin before I realized this thing is towering over me, and I push off from the shore, and he kicks it in gear out of reverse, and we start getting up on step to get out of there. And when we were leaving, he was kind of swaying the skiff back and forth, and I thought he was just trying to get up on step. I thought he was trying to, break the friction of the water to get up on step, a little sooner. But what I found out many years later was he wasn't doing it to get on step. He was doing it to avoid the rocks that they were throwing at the outboard. One rock hit the transom so hard, it left a partial puncture hole in the transom. And, we skipped on out of there. And it wasn't, I was in the bow, and I'm still having this fit of everything closing in, kind of tunnel vision. And I'm looking for the 220 grain bullets for the 30-06 that we typically would use for bear. And what was in it was 180 grain core lock soft tips, the deadliest mushroom in the woods up until that point anyway. And that's basically where the encounter ended. When we got down to where the Nushegak and the confluence of the Nushegak River met, we finally took a minute to take a breather. And immediately I felt like I weighed 1,000 pounds, man, from up all night with the tense muscles and everything, and finally feeling like we got away. I felt like I weighed 1,000 pounds. And that trip ruined our relationship, because when we got back to the village, anyone with a pair of ears, I was telling them, hey, they tried to get us. My uncle and cousin were there. I was telling anyone who would listen. And my uncle was in a position at that time where he didn't want it made public because of this particular position he had. And I pushed the issue. I inadvertently kind of did no good to our relationship either by pressing it so hard. But because of what had happened, I wanted to tell everybody, watch out. They tried to get us. You know what I mean? And they were more wanting to just keep it hush hush and leave it where it was. And because of what we went through, I couldn't not tell somebody and warn them, and it ruined our relationship. I was never able to fully make amends with my uncle. He's since passed. And my cousin that was with us, I talked to him once, and I went over the encounter of what I remember of it with him, and I asked him, am I leaving anything out? And that's when he told me that they were throwing rocks at the outboard. But out of 17 years, we had one 15-minute conversation since that incident.
That's incredible, Fred. And thank you for putting yourself back in. Is that hard to retell? That, that's, I can't imagine.
Sometimes they're easier than others.
Yeah.
There's sometimes it doesn't bother me at all, and other times I get caught in the emotion of it because it ruined my relationship with my family. We were thick as thieves, man. We were 3 peas in a pod. Us 3 were always the ones on an adventure, like always. It was us 3 were the main ones that if there was an adventure to be had, we were on it. And since 06, that all went away.
Do you blame those creatures for having a relationship with your relatives ruined?
I can't blame them. I blame the high stress and their unwillingness to collaborate or basically back me up.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Because I felt in that moment it was going on, I was by myself because my cousin was under the table. My uncle wasn't responsive. So it was just a further continuation of that when we got back to the village. I was told I was a crazy drunk. I was told, oh, you're just making shit up for attention. Like, why in the hell would I make that up for some attention? I gained nothing from that. You know what I mean? I gained nothing. I lost so much. I have gained nothing from it.
Have you ever been back to that area, or do you never go back there?
No, I want to go back. I want to film a documentary, and the documentary I want to do is going to be a cultural thing with just Native peoples on how our oral history from the past kind of meets up with the present, that type of thing. I haven't fully worked it out, but that place is going to be the pinnacle of that documentary. You know what I mean? That it's going to revolve around that spot. But logistically, it is a nightmare to get there. It was expensive for us, and we lived in Dillingham. You know what I mean? So for me to go from where I'm at now back to Dillingham for the same price, I could go to Hawaii twice.
Wow. That's wild, man.
Yeah. So it's a logistical thing. And I sure as hell ain't going by myself. I need to bring some qualified people. Not that my relatives weren't. They were the most qualified I could think of, even to this day, that I know of personally, but everyone's different, you know. I wasn't a hero. In that moment, when I made eye contact with that thing, man, I wasn't going, oh, I'm going to shoot now. I'm going to protect us. No, it was get off me. Get off me. It was nothing heroic. It was self-preservation. In that moment, when I started shooting through the wall initially, my uncle and cousin didn't even exist in my mind in that moment. It was such a shock to my system. It was like every fiber of my being wanted to flee, but it was stuck in my skin. It was like an electrical charge, like just a shock.
It's probably one of the most intense. I would say it is the most intense encounter I've ever heard, Fred. That is incredible that you guys actually survived that, and thankfully you did. Man.
Well, yeah, and that's another reason I had the channel. I also have a website, subarcticalaskasasquatch.com. I have an interactive map of Alaska, and you can zoom in on an area, and there's marker pins, and if you touch the marker pin, or you click on it, it's embedded with my YouTube channel, so it'll bring up the encounter video from that area. So fellow Alaskans or people traveling here can, let's say they're going to Kenai Peninsula, they're going to be by Skilak Lake, let's say, just as an example. They could zoom in on the map, see the Skilak Lake, touch a pin, and they could hear and encounter someone that had from that area, not to scare them away, but to make them aware. It's like bear aware signs, be aware of the bear. You know, it frustrates me that so many people have these encounters, but yet it's treated like, oh, they're making up a story for attention. Man, no one needs this kind of attention. You know what I mean? It's not a badge of honor. But what drives me is no one asked for it. No one asked to be accosted by this big thing out in the woods when they're doing their day-to-day shit. No one asked for that. You know what I mean? And so I'm biased, though. I don't trust them for nothing. And when I hear what I consider fanciful, happy-go-lucky stories about my forest friend, I ain't my friend. I could never be comfortable with one near me ever again. And I can't honestly say that if one wasn't near me, I wouldn't just open fire on it. But that's my own personal bias. And
Sure.
So I leave that out of the encounters I share from people. I just share what they shared with me. I don't put a spin on it. I give what I was given. You know what I mean? And I leave my personal bias out of it. There is a guy, Dan, he shared an experience where he was rescued by a female near the Golcana River back when he was 10. And I asked him, I was like, man, that's pretty cool. I haven't heard anything positive. So, how did you feel? And his words were, I felt like they were trying to get rid of me because of the search and rescue efforts. They had helicopters, small planes, the troopers out in mass looking for him. And he said he didn't feel good about it. He felt like they're getting rid of the nuisance versus really being helpful.
Wow. This has been an incredible conversation, Fred. As we start to head towards the end of our time together, do you have any words for people that might be thinking, I'm going to go out, I'm going to find a Bigfoot this weekend. Do you have any words of advice of how they should maybe change their thinking a little bit?
I would say be careful of what you wish for. And it's not going to be what you think. It's not going to be a harmonious, whatever may be going through your mind. Don't go in naive. They're not our, now this is my opinion, they're not our forest friends. And I can only speak for Alaska because I know it's different down in the States. There's a different level of aggression. Just be careful what you wish for. You don't want what you think you do. You really don't. There's a level of understanding that you're lacking, and you don't want that. Nothing good is going to come of it. There's so many people that have had encounters who had a camera in their hand and did nothing with the camera. They were so in shock. If you have a weak heart, be prepared because you may need a defib. It's not what you think it's going to be. It's not going to be that exciting, oh yay moment. No, it is life-altering, terrifying.
Some wise words from someone who has had multiple encounters themselves. Fred, thank you so much for coming on and sharing what has happened to you. Do you mind taking a few more minutes and sharing with people how they can keep up to date with subarctic Alaska Sasquatch, and what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple email accounts. They could easily be found in the description of the channel. I leave my phone number, and people can contact me that way. During daylight hours, Alaska, if you're on the East Coast, I'm 4 hours behind. So, wherever you may be, just keep that in mind. I've gotten calls at 3 a.m, and it's 7 a.m. Someone's having their coffee and they're waking me up, just to ask some questions. I don't mind the questions. I put my number out there for a reason. But I'm easy to find, man. I'm really not hard. Alaskan Hairyman Project at gmail.com or nocomp907 at gmail.com, or my phone number, which is listed in the opening of my most current video. So I'm easy to find, and I upload content when I can. I live in Alaska, so I'm in winter prep mode, and I got background stuff going on, but I'm very easy to find. If an 80-something-year-old woman in New Orleans can find me, then anyone can.
There you go, man. It is incredible the type of people that find people like us. I totally agree with that, but we appreciate it. And Fred, thank you so much for coming on. I hope to be talking to you again sometime in the future, but keep doing what you're doing, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.